Hello, my name is Arthur, and I'm a pianist and electronic music composer. I love writing instrumental pieces with a focus on storytelling that blends together electronic music and synthesizers with my childhood instrument, the piano. I've also been working with expressivity for more than a decade now, when touche was in its earliest development stages and osmose was just a fantasy in our minds. Now, osmose is a reality, and it helped me design the sound identity of my new album, Komorebi, and we thought it'd be interesting to share my creative process with you. Let's talk a bit about how I used osmose sound in my music. For this album, I've mainly used osmose built-in sounds to bring textures, storytelling, and motion. Let's take this track for instance. It's called The Echoes of the Slumbering Meadows. It's the intro of my album. Like all of my music, it's an instrumental track, and this one is about the very end of the night, just before dawn. Let's focus on the intro of the song. I'm using osmose for these pads. They are like a soft, warm blanket and represent the night's last whispers. It's a preset called midi, and it's supposed to be played, I think, as a key. But I played it as a pad, so more like this. Very softly and progressively. So each key of the osmose is pressure sensitive, so I can barely touch it and already have a sound, and then the more I press, the bigger the sound grows. And something I like with this preset is that you also have a sound when you release the key. So when I press, if I release, and this is very beautiful to me. And when I play this pad, I just apply varying amounts of pressure in each key and make the sound evolve through time just with the pressure of my fingers. Very soft, very warm. Now let's listen to another part of the song where the piano is kind of taking center stage. So here I have this piano, which is the big moment, but I wanted to add more storytelling to it, just not the piano, but also to bring like a more magical atmosphere to the song. In this case, I didn't use Lily as a pad, just as I did before, but I used it like more of a sparkle, glimmery type sound. So what I did is just exactly this motion, which is a bit like casting a spell almost on the keys. So like. It's almost random. I don't really try to do an arpeggio or what. I just touch randomly the keys. And because osmose is so sensitive, and also because I have a not on and not off sound, it creates out of my motion, out of my fingers, kind of a magical, sparkly, glimmery texture, which I love very much, and which was fitting in the storytelling I was trying to do, which is add a magical element to the song. And I find it very interesting to notice that it's really my motion with my hands which creates very different sound. If I am slow and progressive, got a pad. If I'm like a bit more percussive, I've got a key. And if I want to be magical, I can go magical. Another example of how I used osmose to add motion and texture to my songs is inside another track, Morning Brew. There's many parts in this song, but this one is actually a sort of break or bridge. Let's listen to this. So you have this main hook that repeats a few times, then the drums hit. I wanted to add some layers with osmose to kind of bring the drums in, to add sort of a transition, because right now the drums were a bit abrupt. You know, you have the hook, the drums, and nothing in between to sort of blend stuff together. So what I did is I recorded, once again, different layers, but the main one is made with this preset, which is called Dirty OSC Pad here. And this song is called Morning Bloom. It's about blooming. It's about like a forest and flowers blooming. So I thought it would be cool to have this kind of blooming motion. So how do you design a blooming motion? With osmose, it's quite simple. So I had the idea of, like, you know, you have a flower, and then you have like a strand, and then you have the flower itself, all right? So this would be the strand. Just a simple note. I can adjust the volume of the note with pressure. And then when it's big enough, I just open the flower, you will see. See? And so to do this, it's actually kind of fun, because on a normal keyboard, you would typically do like just a chord. It's a bit less fun, I think, and it doesn't really serve my purpose. With osmose, because you can adjust the pressure of each note individually, I adjust the pressure of each note one by one, and it's not a predefined envelope which design the motion. It's actually me. I'm doing the envelope of the sound myself, just by pressing exactly at the pace I want, like growing. I could do it faster. I could do it slower. You see? And so this is just exactly how I did it. I just hit record and it brings the drum in. Then in the second part of the bridge, I'm using a preset called Bouncing Spray. Let's us hear it first, maybe. So. This sound here. So it's like a texture, almost a SFX. I find it very interesting because to me it mirrors a stream of water running through the forest. Like, it's very nice. And so the way I did this is, once again, extremely easy to do with osmose. I've got this preset, it's just the factory preset, and when I press, there's so much stuff happening to the sound at once. It's like infinite variations of sound, like with ease, like I'm doing no effort, just striking a chord progressively, softly. And here, so there's so much amplitude to the sound. You can go from something very soft, very small, to something very wide. And then you can also, for this preset, use the mod wheel to change the rate of the LFO. So with very, very basic and simple motions of your hands, I'm just striking one chord. There's a whole universe of variations going in. So what I did is that I recorded one take for the right channel and another take for the left channel. So when you play both at the same time, it gives you this very wide stereo field, which makes me feel like I'm in the middle of the stream, in the forest, and the water is running through everything around me. And so it gives this in context. It brings so much storytelling to the song. Makes the song move forward. So let me show you one last example of a preset I used a lot in my tracks to generate SFX in various moments. It is called Crackling Things. I've got it here, there. And what I find very interesting is that it's a SFX preset, so just a noise loop basically, so very, very basic. But because osmose is reactive to your motion and to your pressure and what you do with your fingers at all times, it means that depending on how I play it, I can do so many different things. For instance, I can keep it static for like a vinyl crackle, or maybe footsteps. If I play it like this. And then I could use it like for maybe worms in the earth, like. Or maybe a frying pan. Or like I did in my album, more like crackling leaves and stuff. Like wood, you know, wood which is creaking. So it's just a very basic and simple example of how versatile each preset in the osmose is because of the interaction between the sound engine and the expressive keybed of the osmose. So these were just examples of specific presets at specific moments of specific tracks, but my whole album is littered with hundreds of organic, watery and woody textures made with osmose that helped me build my narrative and sonic universe. Because osmose has such expansive and evolutive sounds, it's also really powerful as a starting material for sound design. For instance, let's listen to this rhythmic pad chord section of my track Dawn Fantasy. And the main sound, which is this one, was made with a preset called June Sunset, which is here. So let me just remove a bit of the different effects I had on it. So this is a bass sound. But I think you can also play it like a pad. It's a classic Juno style sound, but the fact that you can adjust its sound in real time with your fingers brings so much life to it. Even like subtle things, little things like bending your fingers just a bit to create a detuned, vintage sound are really fun to do. And then I added some effects to give it a more personal flavor. So I added a reverb and a phaser, and it brings it much closer to my sweet spot of pad sound, like. Then I also added a LFO and utility and some more mixing stuff which give this sound. So it's just a LFO controlling a utility, so a gain basically. So very simple stuff. Then with the aftertouch, I'm choosing which voice is leading. So for instance here, it's a good pitch bend. And what's cool is that even though I completely transformed the original sound, there is still all the expressive power of osmose underneath. I still have room to play and add motion to the sound. Osmose is a very powerful hardware synth, but you can also use it as a MPE keyboard to control software instruments. There's only 3 simple steps to use osmose as a MPE keyboard. The first step would be to go into the external MIDI menu of the osmose. There are different presets, including a classic keyboard one if you want to use osmose as a classic MIDI controller. But we want to use it as a MP controller, so let's select this one here, MPE. The second step is to check that your DAW has the right MIDI settings. So inside of Ableton, I go to the Preferences settings, into the Link, Tempo and MIDI tab, and I have input ports here. And in osmose port 1, not 2, check the track checkbox, and also very important, obviously, the MPE one. The third and last step will be to load a compatible MPE software. There are many cool options on the market already, but Noisy 2 is kind of an obvious choice because it was developed by expressivity to perfectly interact with osmose. I've been using Noisy 2 as the main sound of my track Égez après la pluie. Let's quickly listen to how it sounds like. So I had this core of just drums and bass, and I wanted to add a sound that was more electronic, so I wanted to add an harp, and I made this harp with Noisy 2. One of the strengths of Noisy 2 is that it's really easy to tweak and blend different textures into one sound. So I designed this preset using 2 layers. Let me just show you what the first layer sounds like. So layer 1 and layer 2. I'm gonna disable layer 2 to just focus on layer 1 for the moment. So it's very nice, it's kind of acoustic, but it's also like a fantasized instrument that doesn't really exist, but I don't know, it's kind of an in-between I like a lot. And it's very straightforward, just velocity, changing the brightness of the sound. And then I added a second layer, so let me bypass the first one and just activate the second one, which is more subtle. It's these little clicks that happened only in the very beginning of the key. And then if I go inside the aftertouch of osmose, you have this overtones and little rubbed thing, like a rubbed paper maybe. And when I bring these 2 layers together, something interesting happens, because I have these subtle mechanism noise on one end and a normal sound on the other. And it goes a long way to show how interesting osmose is, because essentially I'm going to play osmose just like I would on any normal keyboard. So I'm not going to bend notes, I'm not going to try to go into the aftertouch like in a progressive way. I'm just going to play notes like on a piano. But because each note has so much leeway, so much depth to it, it means I have more control on my velocity and I can play subtle like. Very clicky, or more like normal. Or very hard. I don't know, I'm not making any effort really, I'm just playing a normal keyboard like I would play on a piano, but because of the interactions I've got between the software and the hardware, there are some little random almost elements that add so much texture and motion and interest to the sound. So I had this sound made with Noisy 2, and I wanted to try to play it with an updater to bring a more electronic vibe to the track. And it happens that the 2.0 Osmose firmware bring the onboard MP arpeggiator feature to the external MIDI instruments, which means that you can now use the MP arpeggiator with your favorite software synthesizers and hardware synthesizers as well, by the way. So let me show you how it works. On the external MIDI tab of the Osmose, you can go to the playing section here, the orange one, and then you turn this knob and you choose arpeggiator. You click on one of the presets, for instance, init, and now I've got an arpeggiator. So I just changed a couple settings, so I'm going into the adjust portion here. You can check I'm in the MIDI clock, I'm synced to the MIDI clock of Ableton. To do this, you can go to the preferences of Ableton and just check that on the output port here, the sync button checkbox for the Osmose port 1 is selected. If this is the case, it should work properly. And then I'm going to change the pattern from up to down. And something else I will do is that in the assign portion, I will say that the aftertouch will control the octave. You will see why in an instant. Instead, I'm going to select this to 2. And then on the second assignation slot, I'm going to say that the bend left is going to control my ratchets to a value of 2, and disable also in my sensitivity the bending. So when I bend, it activates ratchets, but not the bending of the pitch. And now it gives me this behavior. Normal arp, like I would have on any arp, but now if I press on the aftertouch, and if I bend the note left, and this is so cool, like. And this, my friends, is quite incredible to be able to do whilst having both hands on the keyboard and just leaving my creativity free-flowing. It's a fun way to adjust the sound directly with my fingers, and it has saved me a lot of automation time. Lastly, one of the main strengths of working with MIDI and using Osmose with virtual instruments is that once you've done recording, you can still adjust the sound. So for instance, I have this MP arpeggiator we just talked about that I recorded in this track. And at any point, I can just use this parameter to transform the sound from being acoustic to electronic. Something else I wanted to share with you as a lifelong Ableton user is how easy and powerful it is to use Osmose with Ableton stock devices. But even if you're not an Ableton Live user, stick with me because these tips will also apply for any synth that uses MP. It's more like general tips for Osmose. So let's listen to this pat sound from my track Et jette après la pluie. So it was made using Meld, an MP synths plugin included in Live 12 suite that I played with Osmose. I love this sound very much because it's kind of reminiscent of these dark, rainy clouds you can see in thunderstorms. Like, It's soft, but at the same time very distorted. So another hood is a very simple preset and just a bunch of effects to give it some flavor. So let's just deactivate the effects and hear what the sound sounds like. It's a process I often use, especially with osmose. I design a very simple, straightforward, bread and butter sound with a focus on playability that I can later on customize to have different variations of it depending on my needs. And with Ableton instruments, this is extremely easy and quick to set up. So let's start from scratch and load a default meld instance. So I'm going into the Instruments tab, going for meld right here. So this is a default meld sound. Completely boring and uninteresting. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to deactivate the layer B, so I have only one oscillator. I will change the shape of the oscillator to something more brighter. Much more interesting already. And then I would go to the MPE tab here, so it's very quick and very easy. And then let's say I want to adjust the volume of the sound with the pressure of osmose. Well, I just do that, and now I have the pressure of osmose controlling the volume. And maybe also I want to control the filter, so I move the filter, which makes it appear here. And then same thing, I'm choosing pressure here, and maybe something like 30. Oh yes, I need to decrease the filter because I'm opening the filter. So maybe decrease it around here. So now I'm using pressure to control both volume and filter. And also there's a slide parameter here. So it's a bit tricky. On Ableton, the slide name means aftertouch on the osmose. You just have to remember that aftertouch equals a slide. And so I'm going also here, increasing the amount of filter controlled with the slide, which give this pressure for volume and filter, and then aftertouch for some more brightness. And those parameters took me like 3 clicks to do, and already I have a much more living and emotive and expressive sound under my fingers. So much more control. And that's basically all I need to do to lay down the foundations of how osmose interacts with the sound. Then you just have to switch the waveforms for something more pad-like, so maybe swarm so would do the trick. It sounds obviously a bit dry, so let me add the reverb and phaser. Much better already. And then the vintage stuff I added. Another instance where I used osmose with Ableton stock plugins is for this lead sound that I've used in my track Emerald Daydream. this is what it sounds like on its own if I remove the reverb as well. It's really fun. It feels like I'm playing a guitar, which is something I kind of always secretly wanted to do. So essentially, it follows the same principle of having a very simple initial patch that I can modify as I go, but this time I used drift. So this is drift. Let's remove the distortions so you can hear what the sound sounds like on its own. So it's very simple. I'm using aftertouch to open the sound, to brighten it up, which adds cool effects when the distortions are added. So to do this mapping, once again, extremely quick and straightforward. There is a filter of drift here, and there is a little mapping section here. I've selected slide and said, okay, slide, which is aftertouch, controls 100% the filter. I could even maybe put it a bit more softer. So it's soft at the beginning and gets much brighter in the aftertouch. And this is basically it. So it's really simple, really straightforward. And now, instead of having a very flat sound, I can play with the aftertouch. To brighten the sound. By the way, something really cool you can do with osmose is to play with the harmonics of the distortions. So if I would use all the notes at once, it would give this sound, which is way too much. But if I press on each key differently to bring different harmonics, I find it quite fun to do. But the main strength of osmose with these kind of lead sounds is the ability to play with pitch. There is 3 ways I can control the pitch on the osmose. The first one is by adding a vibrato with my finger. The second one is by bending the note, so same as a vibrato but slower. And with the new firmware 2.0, we can use pressure glide with external instruments as well. So same thing, I'm going into the external MIDI mode here, right? And then on the playing tab, I'm going to choose not the arpeggiator, but the pressure glide this time. And I will set it to not an octave, but maybe like an augmented fourth, which means now, if I play 2 notes that are closer than an augmented fourth, so closer than this basically, instead of playing a chord like it would do for a fifth, anything below, you can't play the chord, but instead you have this glide motion, which changes pitch relative to the pressure you have on each note. And all 3 pitch controls are very complementary to one another. So vibrato is for when you want to sustain a note and make it more expressive. Bend is more like when you want to have that kind of, off-tune sound, which is really nice for guitar solos. And then glide would be to transition from one another to another, like. So if I bring back distortion and a bit of reverb, in those cheesy lead sounds I love so much. So in a context of a track, that would give this. So one last thing I wanted to share with you, which is a bit more advanced but also really useful, is that there is a device in Ableton called expression control. So here I have a track with a very basic sample, no expression whatsoever. And if I load on this same track from the MIDI effects tab the expression control plugin, you can see now I have different tabs: velocity, pressure, slide, etc. If I go to the slide, for instance, which I remind you is the aftertouch, when I go into the aftertouch of osmose, you can see this dot moving around, which shows me, first of all, that everything is working fine. So it could also be used as a debug stuff if you want to see if you were receiving MP information from the osmose. But also there is this map button. So if I map this button to the frequency cutoff of my sample, and simpler, by the way, is not a MP device at all. If I do that, now I can control with the slide the filter. And obviously, this means for Ableton heads that any parameter in life which is mappable can be controlled with the slide and with the press from the osmose. It's something I discovered way too late, but I'm looking forward to use it more. That's all for today. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and got inspired by a few of my production techniques. Don't hesitate to give us your ideas for our next creative tutorials in the comment section. Thank you for watching and have fun making music.